Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Hey, happy Pride Month to those who celebrate, and welcome to Revolution. So today we're going to talk about this man. Well, we're not going to talk about him as much as we're going to talk about his ideas and one of his sermons, and he's got a lot. There's 3 books this size of Paul Tillich's sermons, and they're all pretty great. You know, it's really fun. I like when they put all this like published by. I wish they made books that still looked like this. So I think if I write my next book, when I write my next book, I'm going to make them look like this. I like these old, like, 50s, 60s style books. I think this one, yeah, look at that. That's cool, right? I can never have enough of old books. I love them. I've got like a few copies of this. I've even got it in hard copy. So we're going to talk about Paul Tillich. Look, this is from Life magazine. See, boop. I'm going to read this to you. Let's see what it says. And if you guys want to know more about this You Are Accepted talk, you can Google it by putting in Paul Tillich, You Are Accepted. And it'll come up and you can read through it with me. Like I said, we also have Peter Rollins recorded himself reading it for us. And that's also on all of our, like on our YouTube and on all of our podcast sites. So you can check those out there. So I'm really excited about this. So I'm going to read this. Let's see. It's got A, B, C, and D, all these little facts. And they're questions. It's like, this must have been from like life trivia. The professor of theology was the first non-Jewish professor dismissed from the university by the Nazis when they came into power. When did that happen? 1933. So he is the first non-Jewish professor to have been told to leave by the Nazis. I've got, right now on Facebook, I've put up some stuff talking about him, and I've got this guy on Facebook telling me that you can't be a Christian socialist because he was a socialist, and I'm pretty much a socialist, but and he's upset that we're reading this because he's a socialist. And people really get strange hang-ups sometimes. This theologian came to New York from Germany to teach what institution that trains people for Christian ministry. Union Theological Seminary, which I've also had the pleasure of speaking at Union Theological Seminary a couple times and seen Cornel West speak there and a few different people speak there. So that was really a treat in my life to be able to be there. Who is this philosopher and theologian? Paul J. Tillich. And what is the name of his 3 volumes work published between 1951 and 1963? Systematic Theology. And I will tell you what, I have only read all of Systematic Theology 1 in its completeness, and I don't think I could tell you much about it. Those are some dense reading. And if you ever hear me being like, hey, we're going to do Systematic Theology, just realize that that's going to be the rest of life, because that would be really hard. One of the things that Paul Tillich's known for as well is he was very European and very interesting human being. If you read any of his stuff about his personality and his life and his marriage, it was very interesting. So so Tillich uses his word for God as the ground of being. So, Tillich doesn't believe that God's like this man in the sky, or, this being sitting in the sky or in the heavens looking down upon us. Tillich he's also a philosopher. So Paul Tillich is not just a theologian, but he's also a philosopher. He's quite a brilliant man, so it can be hard to... I will tell you, here's a good intro to his philosophy and theology is this book right here. My Search for Absolutes by Paul Tillich. This is really a grand place to start if you want to know more about Tillich, and something that's not almost impossible to read. Like, his most popular book was, I think, what was it? It was the Courage to Be. I think is the Courage to Be, and it was really popular in the 1950s. And I thought, I should be able to breeze through this, and it's a really complicated book to read. It wasn't that easy. I should try again. It's been a few years since I took a go at it, so I should take a new go at it since I've been studying some Hegel. I'm sure Tillich might be a little bit easier than that. But yeah, I mean, even reading the article, the I think it's 58 or 59 article of him in Time magazine, you could just tell that people read a lot more back then. So I'm going to give you guys a concept of, before we read the Tillich's talk, a little what he means by the ground of being. See if I can sum this up. One could also call it the feeling of holiness of being as being, whatever it may be. The being transcends everything, particularly without becoming empty, for it embraces everything particular. Being in this sense is power of being, and it is in the infinitely full, inexhaustible, but indefinite absolute. It is the basis of truth, because it is the transcendence of subjects and objects. And it is the basis of the good because it contains every being in its essential nature, and, as well as we shall see, the norms of every ethical command. And it is this identical within the holy. And it is this that is identical within the holy. The ground of everything that has being. So he's saying that for him, that his understanding of God is that God is the ground of everything that has being. And because, again, all this does is deny the relativism of cognitive encounters with reality. But it shows that relativism is only possible on the basis of a structure of absolutes. Now, I'm going to try not to get into all that. But that's why Tillich says is the ground of being. Now, you might think, well, that's a little bit hard to understand. But yeah, it's really good. What are your thoughts about the blacks? Everyone's welcome here. We love everybody. And I don't know. That's a weird question. What are my thoughts? There you go. So here, let's jump into Paul Tillich's talk, You Are Accepted. I hope that was enough for you. If not, check this book out, look up this talk. But he's going to use the ground of being a lot, so I just wanted to get you that idea. And he has a different concept, and not a different concept. He will make clear what his concepts of sin and grace are as well within this talk. I cannot recommend this book enough. You can find it on eBay pretty cheap, and it's really worth it. There's a bunch of copies up there right now that I recently looked at. So yeah, check it out. So this is a sermon that he gave, that Paul Tillich gave in the 50s, and this is a collection of those talks. And I believe he gave a lot of these at Union Seminary. And you also might see something clear of why I'm constantly talking about unity, that it's not just reading social justice leaders or civil rights leaders or peacemakers that bring this about, but it's also with me within the Gospels, within the Bible of the New Testament, but it's also within these theologians and these philosophers and what they're talking about. So you'll see why there's this constant move, and we'll talk a little bit about this as we go through this sermon. But the sermon is based off of this verse in Romans 5:20. Moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound. But where sin abounds, grace did much more abound. You hear that? But where sin abound, grace did much more abound. And as you guys know, Revolution has always been kind of based on the message of grace. I always forget. Say, don't forget to like. Give us a thumbs up and follow. I always forget that. My kids watch these videos and, there's one, I saw one video the other day that was like, if you don't like us, you don't love your parents. I was like, all right, fast forward that one. That person's a creepo. But if you don't like this, you don't like your parents. I'm just kidding. Like and subscribe. That's what they like, and subscribe and turn on your notifications. All right. Here we go. Paul Tillich. These words of Paul summarize his apostolic experience, his religious message as a whole. He's talking about Paul Tillich. Paul Tillich's talking about the Apostle Paul right now. And the Christian understanding of life. To discuss these words or to make them the text of even several sermons has always seemed impossible to me. I have never dared to use them before. But something has driven me to consider them during the past few months. A desire to give witness to the two facts which appeared to me in hours of retrospection as all the determining facts of our life. The abounding of sin and the greater abounding of grace. I really love that. The abounding of sin and the greater abounding of grace. There are few words more strange to most of us than sin and grace. They are strange just because they are so well known. During the centuries, they have received distorting connotations and have lost so much of their genuine power that we must seriously ask ourselves whether we should use them at all or whether we should discard them as useless tools. And I'll say, like, growing up, like, in the evangelical church and, like, really, like, magical thinking and miracles and speaking in tongues and all that wild stuff, growing up in that, like, grace seemed to be like an afterthought. Now, sin was always a big word because sin is, I grew up where they believed in the rapture theology. And I don't believe in the rapture, but, all this crazy stuff. And so sin you heard a lot about because you didn't want to, and it was, Arminians, so you could lose that salvation, and sin could just take it right away. And so it's not great theology, to be honest with you, but it was what I was raised to believe in. And so that was a word we knew a lot of, but also had different meanings. But grace seemed always to be an afterthought or just a lyric to a song, It wasn't really until my late teens, early 20s, really 20s or 20 that I really understood grace. But there is a mysterious fact about the great word of our religious tradition. They cannot be replaced. All attempts to make substitutions, including those I have tried myself, I have failed to convey the reality that was to be expressed. They have led to a shallow and impotent talk. They are no substitutes for words like sin and grace, but there is a way of rediscovering their meaning in the same way that leads us down into the depths of our human existence. Now, that's pretty heavy words put together right there, if you think about it. They have led us to shallow and impotent talk. And I will say that really, I feel like so many people today have made this kind of impotent talk, especially sin and grace. Like, I think the progressives have made grace impotent, and I think the more conservative evangelical folks, and I'm not trying to lump everybody in together, but like if we're just going to split for a second and use broad strokes, have made sin kind of like this, like, you know, some guy yelling at you on the corner of the street. You know, like these are just like words of like bad, good, you know, and have really made them impotent. Because, and why do I say progressive? Because you think that that would be the group that really had grace figured out. But often, and conservative, and you know, one of the things, it's funny, I was attending a conservative Calvinist, well, not conservative, but it was a Calvinist church. And I was like, man, I love these messages of grace. Their messages of grace are really great. Until I realized that they meant that grace is only for a selected few and that nobody else gets it. And then I thought, oh, well, it went from being really amazing grace to just like, you know, just the chosen ones. And luckily, we're the chosen ones. It's funny how that works, is that everybody in there happened to be the chosen ones. So to me, that also made grace impotent, that type of thinking of that grace is just for these special folks. So we have really lost the realities of these words. And I see it practiced with people, you know, it breaks my heart, and I'm having people be like, you got to ignore these people, you got to stop. But for me, like, if I want to see unity built in the church, if I want to see conversations and tough conversations happening, we have to speak truth to some of these people. And a lot of these progressive folks don't understand what grace is, but they think that grace is for them and grace is for their LGBTQ brothers and sisters and for all those folks. But like when it comes to like evangelical Christians who never showed them grace, well, since they never showed them grace, they don't get any grace. So it's like, no grace for you. But that's not it either. Grace is for everyone. And so grace and sin have just become very impotent words. And so let's look and see what someone who's an actual theologian, scholar who Hitler thought was worrisome enough to kick out of Germany because this guy was too smart for his own good. Let's see what the highly educated, the towers of academia have to say. There are no substitutes for words like sin and grace. But there is a way to rediscovering them the meaning in the same way that leads us into the depths of our human existence. I would say when you use a line like the depths of our human existence, this is a time to pay attention. This is a big, the depths of our human existence. In that depth, those words were conceived, and there they gained power for all ages. There they must be found again by each generation. You hear that? Again by each generation. And I think we can see that there's like generation gaps in these understandings and these ideas and these thoughts. You know, we all fight these good fights, but then a younger group come and they forget about those times. They forget about what these people went through, and now they feel like there's all this new stuff. And then us old folks come along and go like, well, actually, and they go, oh, you don't understand. I had this young man I was recently talking to, which is weird to call somebody who's in their late 20s a young man, but you would have thought that he thought I was from the moon by the way he was talking to me. You don't understand how humor works. You don't understand how these things work. I'm like, yeah, okay. All my life experience is null and void. Please, young master, tell me the ways. But these must be found again by each generation. So that's the hard part, is when you're trying to share this stuff with people and they go, oh, I don't want to hear it. And by each of us for themselves. So it's not just but for all of us, for ourselves to understand these things. Don't forget to like or subscribe. We can discover them. The realities of which, okay, so again, by each generation and by each of us himself. Let us therefore try to penetrate the deeper levels of our life in order to see whether we can discover them and the realities of which our text speaks. And the text being, again, a reminder, is Romans 5:20 that says, but where sin abounds, grace did much more abound. So here we're going to look at the idea of sin a little bit. Have the men of our time still feeling the meaning of sin? Have the men of our time still a feeling of the meaning of sin? It's a question he's asking. Do they and do we still realize that sin does not mean an immoral act? Now, if you would ask most people, most preachers, most teachers, they would say that sin means an immoral act. We're going to look at what grace means as well as in here. Did we realize that sin does not mean an immoral act? That sin should never be used in the plural. So there should never be the word sins, like your sins are many, but we'll talk about that another day. And in not our sins, but rather our sin is the great, all-pervading problem of our life. Do we still know that it is arrogant and erroneous to divide men by calling some sinners and others righteous? So this separation, so obviously Tillich's not into the predestination of these people are good, these people are bad, even though he was a Lutheran. For by ways of such division, we can usually discover that we ourselves do not quite belong to the sinners, since we have avoided heavy sins, have made some progress in the control of of this or that sin, of this or that sin. I like how all of a sudden they go kind of plural, and have been even humble enough not to call ourselves righteous. Are we still able to realize that this kind of thinking and feeling about sin is far removed from what the great religious tradition, both within and outside the Bible, has meant when we speak of sin? So we're going to be looking at these. Are going to be different ideas. I see Casey looked it up online, but this is not going to just be the grace is just for salvation talk. But this goes deeper than that. The dictionaries don't do it. Just traditional dictionaries don't do it justice. I should like to suggest another word to you, not as a substitute for the word sin, but as a useful clue. So here we're going to get a useful clue in the interpretation of the word sin. Look, I'm highlighting as we talk. And the word is separation. Now, this is really interesting, and this is Paul Tillich's concept of what he believes about sin, is that sin is this concept of separation. And I think when we look at this, we'll realize that, oh, this is in a lot more places, and some of us, this is almost the concept of our theology is really about separating other people in separation, and that some of our theology might just be more sin-focused than we imagined. But not my like, sin, I'm not trying to be like a weird street preacher about it. Sin is separation. To be in the state of sin is to be in the state of separation. And in separation is threefold. There is separation amongst the individual lives, which a lot of us deal with every day. Separation of man from himself, us from our unconscious, from our unknowing ourselves. And separation of all men from the ground of being. Now remember, we talked about the ground of being when we started about that's Tillich's concept of God, is that we have kind of this separation obviously there. I think what's interesting is the separation amongst individual lives. It seems that almost some of us really desire to be separate from others and to separate ourselves from others based on our concept of deciding who the society says they are. So like, I don't like these people, and so we just judge everyone as a whole and we leave out all nuances. I don't like conservatives, or I don't like progressives, or I don't like white people, or I don't like Hispanic, and so we group this whole group of people together and we judge them in a way and we're separate from them. We're often separated from people because they're not into the same things we're into and things like that. But Tillich is saying that this is technically this is what it is when there's this thing that continues to push within separation. And if you know anything about peacemaking, if you know anything about civil rights, it's always this cause to try to bring us together. It's when we lose ourselves and we lose the message and we go astray and go like, okay, well, our civil rights and our justice is just for us and not for that group. That's when it fails to become, when everyone's not included, when everyone's not respected for who they are, when everybody is that's, he's saying this is the sin. And we do that so much. You know what I mean? It would be like saying, well, oh, Jay's into punk rock or Jay's into British rock, and so he has to hang out with those guys. Those are the people. Like, when I go to a punk rock show, like, I don't have a lot in in common with everybody there. We like the same music. We might have different politics. We might have different ideas. We probably have different ideas about spirituality and things like that. We're not all same people. There's like so many nuances going on. But, the world and social media and everybody just says, put everybody in this group and then separate yourself from those who aren't into that same thing. And then once you start to get too tight into that group, I've seen this so many with like Facebook groups and things like that, where they're fighting a common cause. And then when that common cause kind of starts to disappear, is no longer the fight, then they start to have to run out of things to fight. And so they start to fight each other and become separate with one another. So it's almost like separation begets separation. Like separation causes more separation to happen, and division. And that's where lies in the idea of sin. When I was growing up, there were these evangelical groups called heretic hunters, and we still see that today. We see it a lot in progressives and in where they try to go out and point out, these people are preaching heresy, so we must separate ourselves from these horrible people and these bad people, and they're wrong. Or this person made a mistake, or this person sinned, so we must separate themselves. So we take the idea that sin somehow requires the separation, but you're saying like, oh, someone made a mistake, so now I'm going to separate from them. And when you're separating from them and cutting them off, in Tillich's concept of what sin would be, so that's the actual sin itself, is that pulling away or pushing away, or that shaming, or that discouraging, or that abandoning. That's where sin would lie within the Tillichian idea and concept. But we also have separation from ourselves sometimes. And I think that comes a lot for me as a kid. I used to think I was separate from God because God hated me and I couldn't do anything right. And I tried to do what it was right, but I couldn't. But I also had no understanding of what the unconscious was and what it was like to just actually understand those things, nor what grace was. And so in some ways I was separate from myself. Like when Paul, the Apostle Paul says, I try to do what I want, but I don't, This whole inner separation, and then the separation from God, because everybody told me, I have people, like yesterday morning, I literally woke up to someone telling me that my 30 years of work of being a pastor and doing this work was completely null and void, not because I've been divorced or any sin in my life, but because I believed the wrong thing about LGBTQ people, because I included my LGBTQ brothers and sisters. And and so I'm no longer considered to be a good pastor. And then I'm called naive by, like I've been just like, it's really funny to be like, all these people want to discount me for too much inclusion. Like when I start seeing some of my progressive friends say that I'm lukewarm, or that I'm in the middle. What's the word for that? A moderate. I also know that's an insult. Or someone called me a theological dude bro the other day, which that's like insult. And all these words are made to separate. And what I'm trying to fight is separation. I had a conservative fellow tell me this morning, after hearing one of my talks about why I talk about inclusion and unity, that's magical thinking, and that he doesn't think that way, and we've got to get away from that. And what a bummer. It's like even this guy's lost the idea that we can have different ideas and that we can disagree. It's always this us and them thing. And so I feel like the ministry of Revolution is called to say, well, grace is sufficient, you are accepted, and these ideas that continue to separate us are bullshit, and they shouldn't separate us. We should be able to come together. We should be able to argue well. We should be able to disagree. We shouldn't give up that idea. That's why I love John Hume, because of Northern Ireland, and seeing how he brought Northern Ireland together over his life, over 30 years of work with other people, of course. But it took time to heal that separation. And I'm sure there's still wounds being healed now, but it's possible. And I've had a lot of people in here be like, it's a pipe dream. It's not a pipe dream. I'm a prisoner of hope. I'm a pessimist, but I am a prisoner of hope, just like Dr. Cornel West says. These threefold separations constitute the state of everything that exists. It is a universal fact. It is the fate of every life. And in our human fate, in a very special sense, for we as men, he uses male pronouns in everything he says, got to remember this was written in the 50s, and he's German. For we as men, and English is not his first language, for we as men know that we are separated. We not only suffer with all other creatures because of this self-destructive consequence of our separation, but also know why we suffer. We know that we are estranged from something to which we really belong. In which we should be united. And I'm going to stop there again for a second. And I think this is one of the reasons why I'm always so amazed by my progressive brothers and sisters, because I really have a lot more in common with them theologically and probably politically as well in some ways. I know we're supposed to be united. Like I got this young man the other day told me, he's like, well, you don't even know me. And I'm like, but we're humans and we have similar work and we do this. And I feel like we're supposed to be united. I mean, just even through our own humanity. And he did not agree with that. But for me, I have this thing of like, I know that we belong. I know that these conversations need to be happening. And I know they don't need to be leading to us belittling one another and writing each other off and continuing to create more separation. And so for me, this Tillich nails it on the head, when he says, we know that we are estranged from something to which we really belong and with which we should be united. It's why when I get off the phone with my dad and we've had a big argument and we can't see eye to eye and he's sick and I know that we're separate and I know that there's politics and religion and all this crap in the way, but why I cry, why I mourn, why I hurt, why I get angry is because I know that this separation isn't what should be. I know that there's something that should unite us bigger than all of this. When we see war and our hearts break and we see these people killing each other, we know it's wrong because we're going like, there's something, this shouldn't be happening. And I think unconsciously we know that there should be united, there should be recognition of one another's existence and people belonging to one another as humans. We know that the fate of separation is not merely a natural event like a flash of sudden lightning, but that it is an experience in which we actively participate. Did you hear that? Like separation is an experience that we actively participate in which our whole personality is involved. And that, as fate, it is also guilt. Separation, which is fate, and guilt constitutes the meaning of the word sin. That's Tillich's idea. So everything he's saying, this is sin. It is this which is the state of our entire existence. From the very beginning to its very end, such separation is prepared in the mother's womb, and before that time, in ever preceding generation. Let's think about it, how we have like, hey, okay, boomers and things like that. Those are things that are to separate. And the generation Y, and the generation, and generation X doesn't give a damn. And all these separations separate. What can we continue to do to put each other into categories? I see people like, we got to stop evangelical Christians. And now it's become, we've got to stop white evangelical Christians. Like it's become like even more, like way more, like how do we even separate this and get this down, even find it to more separation? It manifests in this special action of our conscious life. It reaches beyond our graves into all succeeding generations. So after we're gone, it's there. It is our existence itself. Existence is separation. Before sin is an act, it is a state. And so he's saying before sin is an act, sin is separation. And I will say, if you think about it, like if you think about like radio people and people online and things like that, some people's whole existence and their whole work is separation, is to separate people, is to say we're better than them, or those people are stupid, or these people are bad, or these people are right, and those people are wrong. And you see a lot of people who just focus on how can we further separate one another. And we wonder why we're all kind of like miserable and suffering. And like, I think everybody would like to have a house and food and a job and be able to afford health care and maybe be able to argue about stuff like this rather than us making our convictions into law, that we would rather just maybe argue about these things down at the pub, or at church on Sunday or at our bingo game or whatever. So let's look at grace. Are you guys ready for grace?
I know I am.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm sorry, I listen to all my kids' YouTube videos, so now that's in my brain. Maybe we can get Mr. Beast to follow us. That's who my kids really like. We can say the same thing about grace. For sin and grace are bound to each other. And this is what blows me away. Sin and grace are bound to each other. We do not even have a knowledge of sin unless we have already experienced the unity of life. So there's moments that we see this unity of life which make us realize that we shouldn't be separated. I mean, the time I spent with my dad in prison, I saw the unity that I had in my relationship with him there. It's funny because the time I spent with the Emergent Church, I hung out with a lot of people that I didn't necessarily agree with, but there was this kind of cool community there. And we were able to talk to each other, and we were able to disagree with each other. So that realizes me, so sometimes when I'm speaking to people, I forget that they don't think of community that way. Like they don't think oh, you just rebuked me. I'm like, well, no, I mean, aren't we in community? Aren't we doing the same thing? And they'll make it very clear, no, you're not like me. We're separate. We can say the same thing about grace, for sin and grace are bound to each other. We do not even have a knowledge of sin unless we have already experienced the unity of life, which is grace. And conversely, we could not grasp the meaning of grace without having experienced the separation of life, which is sin. Grace is just as difficult to describe as sin. And so this is why we were talking about because I've done the same thing. Looking it up in the dictionary, even looking it up in theological dictionaries is different. And then you look it up in, but let's look what Dr. Tillich has to say about this. I'm not saying he's the end-all, know-it-all, but I think it just leads us in a better direction. So, grace is just as difficult to describe as sin. Don't worry, we're not going through the whole talk today. We're almost there. This part one. For some people, grace is the willingness of the divine King and Father to forgive over and again the foolishness and the weakness of his subjects and children. So that's the idea, like it's just this forgiveness, well, you don't deserve it, but you've got it. That's unmerited favor. That's what most people would ask what grace is. They'll say unmerited favor. That's what I said for years as well. But Tillich says, listen to what Paul Tillich says. We must reject such a concept of grace. So Tillich says we've got to reject this concept of grace. Boom, it's got to go. This unmerited favor, grace is not just for unmerited favor anymore, And let's read on what he says. And it's not easy. And it's funny because he's blowing out of the water a lot of our sacred cows. For it is merely childish destruction of human dignity. That's how he feels about that explanation of grace. For others, grace is a magic power in the dark place of the soul, but a power without any significance or for a practical life. And I feel like growing up in the assemblies of God, that was kind of what grace was for me. It's like, it's just there for the dark night of the soul when you're wrestling with the devil. It goes on to say, but the power without any significance for personal life, a quick, vanishing, and useless idea. So that, for me, growing up in the Assemblies of God denomination as a child, that's how I saw grace, is just kind of like not really helpful. You'll name your church that maybe, or something like that, or your child that. I had a dog named Gracie. For others, grace is a benevolence that we may find besides the cruelty and the destructiveness in life. But then it does not matter whether we say life goes on, which a lot of us do when life is shit, life goes on, or it is what it is, which is just basically the new version of life goes on, or whether we say there is grace in life. If grace means no more than this, the word should and will disappear. Are we getting a little, I feel like we're watching like a a movie and we're about, what's going to happen next? It's like Hitchcock, you know. For other people, grace indicates the gifts that one has received from the nature or society and the power to do good things with the help of those gifts. Now, Tillich says something interesting here. He goes, but grace is more than gifts. So he's saying that grace is a gift of those things that we have. I think grace is the gift I've had from going through the tragedies that I've gone through and seen horrific separation and horrific scapegoating to bring me to this point where I want people to come together, which I don't know why, but that's, for me, is a gift from grace. But it's so much more. But grace is more than a gift. In grace, something is overcome. This is where I really want. Grace incurs, now listen to this. Grace incurs in spite of. Now he puts these quotes in spite of. Grace occurs in spite of. That's the one to remember. In spite of. Maybe I should get in spite of underneath my grace tattoo on my arm. Grace in spite of. Not out of spite, but in spite of. Something, in spite of something. Grace occurs in spite of something. Grace occurs in spite of separation and estrangement. Now, this is where you see the work of people like Dr. King and John Hume and Harvey Milk and different folks like this, where they come in and something happens in spite of the horrible separation, in spite of the big divide. Someone said something dark side. Actually, think about that. I think Luke Skywalker saving his father and carrying Darth Vader through the Death Star is that in spite of light and darkness, despite of the roles that we've been told by the Jedi and by the Sith, in spite that, grace occurs. And so when you see that moment of reconciliation between Vader and Luke, that is grace in spite of. When you hear that people go meet with the murderers of their children or family members and show grace, something is happening there in spite of horrific circumstances. There's an example of a type of grace. All right, I'll try to continue reading this. Grace is the reunion of life with life, the reconciliation of the self with itself. It's us saying we are accepted and accepting that. It's my mom's book, I Gotta Be Me, that type of thing, accepting me, warts and all. Grace is the acceptance of that which is rejected. And so everything that we're told, when we say we are going to connect, we are going to be restored, we are going to accept that which is rejected, no matter what my conservative brothers and sisters tell me or my progressive brothers and sisters tell me that I have to reject. I'm going to accept that which is rejected. And that's what the work of revolution is accepting that which has been rejected by the majority and by so many people. And I just reject it. And it's funny to see that like both sides reject this type of grace, and we're saying no, we're not going to reject it. It's going to be we're going to find acceptance of that which has been rejected. So that's one of the really main calls of this work that I'm doing here and that we're doing together, and that I hope we bring into our everyday lives. So grace is the acceptance of that which is rejected. I'm sure you'll see me put this up all over social media. Grace transforms fate into meaningful destiny. It changes guilt into confidence. Can you imagine? It turns guilt into confidence and courage. So it changes guilt into confidence and courage. There is something triumphant in the word grace. And in spite of the abounding of sin, grace abounds much more. Back to referring to what the Apostle Paul was saying in the book of Romans. And now let us look down onto ourselves to discover the struggle between separation and reunion. You hear that? The struggle between separation and reunion. That could also be a tagline behind, we have Revolution Community. It could be, say, Revolution, separation and reunion. And maybe we'll do that. Maybe that'll be our next little logo, is it'll be Revolution, separation, and reunion. Between sin and grace. In our relation to others. And see, that's a very important thing, is because there's so much to divide us between other people. And I've circled that, our relation to others, because that really concerns me, that we're all so separate from each other, not just from ourselves and not just from God, but really from each other. And that we continue to come up with new ideas and new ways and new reasons to be separate from the other. In our relationship to ourselves and to our relationship with the ground, which is God, and am of our being. If our souls respond to the description that I intend to give, words like sin and separation, grace and reunion may have new meaning for us. But the words themselves are not important. It is the response of the deepest level of our being, and this is where Tillich really gets heavy again, is saying it is the response of our souls. It is the response of our unconscious. It is the response within us. It is the response within the lack that exists. It's such a response to occur. It is the response of the deepest level of our being that is important. In such a response, if such a response were to occur amongst us this moment, we could say that we have known grace. And my hope for this talk, and for every talk, and all of this work, and all of my work personally, is that we will come and say we have known grace, and that people who interact with me and interact with all of us here will say, I have experienced grace, or I have seen grace, or I've had a peek of grace. I have seen that which is unacceptable become accepted. I've seen grace that accepts that which is rejected. I have seen that. And if you think about the cross and you think about all these different ideas, you think to the beauty of that. So that's where we're going to finish today. We have, we have 6 pages to go. And I believe that was only 3 pages, maybe 4 pages. So we'll probably be in this another week, maybe 2. Highly recommend listening to Peter Rollins' reading of this. But like he said, it's hard to understand if you haven't studied Tillich and all this stuff. So I really want to just strip it down, and we can all experience this together as human beings, and strip it down to really understanding what this is about, and what it's saying to us. So there's that. So thank you for being with us today. Thanks for being with Revolution today. Hey, listen, the way we do this is by having Revolution. And last month was embarrassing. I hate raising funds. And one of the things I always want to make clear is we'd much rather have you than your money every time. But if you're in a place where you can support this work and make this work possible, we are literally working on our minimum budget. We have been doing Revolution for 30 years. I hope we're not going anywhere. But we exist because folks like you are able to support us, or friends and things like that. It helps support us. It's been really cool because I've had some people support us who don't even attend Revolution, but feel like there's something good that we're doing and support us. So, but last month, we really got down to the last day. We're actually behind by 5 days, but we made it. And I had to ask every day, and I'm okay to do that. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to make other people uncomfortable. I don't want people, look at the baker here I'm not trying to get rich. I'm literally just trying to pay Revolution's bills and also get my pay and be able to pay my bills and take care of my kids. That's it. No lavish lifestyle, no fun cars, no swimming pools. I rent an apartment. I mow the lawn to get money off of my apartment. I take care of the lawn to do that kind of stuff. I've applied for over 30 jobs and met with 3 pastors last week. Full disclosure. But we do need your support, and every little bit it counts. Also, just sharing this with other people, liking and subscribing and sharing these talks with other people also help as well. I really hope one day we'll find a foundation that really likes what we do and wants to kind of build into it and help us grow even more. But right now, this is where we're at. So you can go and donate by going to revolutionchurch.com. And if you have PayPal or Venmo, you can do that. And I've been doing the Venmo thing, and I've also got links to the PayPal. So I'm trying to send out thank you letters and things like that. It's a lot easier for me to send thank yous on Venmo than PayPal. I'm still figuring out PayPal, strangely enough. It doesn't work exactly the same, but they're both owned by the same company, which is really weird because we've got both of them. And so anyhow, there you go. More options to do that. And we've also had some friends who work for companies who companies will double a donation to a nonprofit. And we are a 501c3 tax deductible group. So you can also do that well as soon. Thank you. I'm hoping to find a job soon as well. It is really tough out here. Like it's so easy to judge other people when I've seen them complain about not being able to get work, and then like, I wonder if they're, now I'm trying, and I'm like, oh, now I'm in their shoes. It's really tough. Anyway, oh goodness, I guess I won't be going into my mailbox later today. Looks like a 5-year-old got on here, even though this isn't for kids. But thank you all so much for this time. And we're going to continue to go through this for the next week or two. And I will only tell you is that if you thought today was good, like Tillich's talk gets way better. Like this, You Are Accepted gets way better. Check it out online. You'll see where we're going. And then I'll be putting commentary and my own spin on Tillich's work as well. So I love you all. Thank you so much for being here today and being part of the Revolution Gathering. And keep an eye on Instagram and Facebook. I'm putting up a lot more videos now, trying to share things, give people little sneak peeks of what's coming up and what I'm working on. I don't want to oversaturate anybody, but trying to just stay focused with the work we're doing. So thank you so much for being there today. Keep an eye on all those things. We're going to be doing some things, hopefully some surprise interviews and different things like that on our Instagram as well as our Facebook, which we got to do a great one with Lawrence a few weeks ago that just was out of the blue about disagreeing well, which I was really happy. If you even got a chance to check out that talk with Lawrence, please check that out. Lawrence is an amazing human being. Follow that man. He is fantastic. All right. Thanks a lot. See you all next week. Same time, same bat channel.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.